Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alejandra Spear Haddad, and the topic of my presentation is the life of Saint Thecla. The primary source that I am using is the Acts of Paul and Thecla. I want to begin by telling you that the reason I chose Saint Thecla for my presentation is because I feel I have a very close relationship with her story. Um, See, for almost 10 years, while visiting my family in Lebanon, I made a series of pilgrimages to visit some special holy places in Syria. I had to stop because of the war, but I hope and pray that soon I will get to do it again. The places that I chose because I felt a special spiritual connection with them. So I always began my pilgrimage with a visit to the tomb of John the Baptist, which is inside the beautiful Umayyad Mosque in the center, right in the center of old Damascus. And then I continued with a visit to the monastery of Saidanaya, which was built by Emperor Justinian I in the year 540 AD, which he built because he had a vision of the Virgin Mary, asking him to build a church and to dedicate it to her. So he called it Sadanaya because Sadanaya in Arabic means Our Lady. Then I continued with a visit to the church of Mar Elias. Uh, Mar Elias is Saint Elijah in Arabic. And this church is built in the place where it is believed that Elijah went to heaven in his chariot of fire. Uh, and my last stop in this pilgrimage um, was always the town of Ma'lula. Ma'lula is a small town northeast of Damascus and is one of the few places left in the world where Aramaic, the language of Jesus, is still spoken. In this town, there is the monastery of Mar Thecla, which is Saint Thecla in Aramaic, and it is believed that this monastery holds the remains of Saint Thecla. According to a later story, which is not part of the Acts of Paul and Thecla, Thecla was being pursued because of her Christian faith by soldiers sent by her powerful family to capture her because they felt that she had dishonored them. After running and hiding for many days and nights, Thecla came to a mountain, and after praying, the mountain split open and let her escape through. Thecla spent the rest of her life living and ministering in a cave inside this mountain. This cave is at the heart of the monastery and is, according to the story, where her remains are kept. Ma'alula, the name of the town, means gap or entry into the mountain. The monastery of San Thecla in Ma'alula is a holy pilgrimage site for both Christians and Muslims, and Thecla is a role model for all women throughout the Middle East, regardless of their faith. Many miracles have been attributed to Saint Thecla, and it is testified by the many thank you notes and testimonies that have been left inside the cave where her remains are kept. Even though I have been a devout follower of Saint Thecla for many years, it is only recently that I became aware of the existence of the document, The Acts of Paul and Thecla. Although the story in the document is not exactly the same story that I knew, there are many similarities between them. In fact, the biggest difference between the two stories is that in the Acts of Paul and Thecla, Thecla spends the later years of her life in Seleucia, and in the story I learned in Ma'lula, Thecla lives in Ma'lula until the end of her life. Um, Now, about the primary source, the Acts of Paul and Thecla. It is a document that belongs to the New Testament Apocrypha and was originally published, according to some scholars, between the years 68 and 98 AD. And according to other scholars, it was published during the latter parts of the 2nd century between the years 160 and 170 AD. The Acts of Paul and Thecla tells the story of Thecla as a young virgin from the town of Iconium who listened to the teachings of Apostle Paul on virginity and decided to leave her fiancé and her mother to become a follower of Apostle Paul. Thecla defies the social expectations of her time and against her family's wishes and disregarding many dangerous threats to her life. She devotes herself to the teachings and the ministry of the Apostle Paul and to the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Acts is the earliest record of her life. It is believed that Thecla was born in the year 30 AD in Iconium, Turkey, and that she died at the end of the 1st century in Seleucia, according to the Acts, but according to the story told in Ma'alula, she dies in Ma'alula. The Acts of Paul and Thecla is first mentioned by the church father Tertullian in his document De Baptismo in the year 190 AD, and later it is mentioned by Jerome, who is essentially quoting Tertullian in his document De Uiris Illustribus, completed between the years 392 and 393 AD. Both documents are used to advocate against the women's right to preach and to baptize, and are also written against to question the historical accuracy and the authorship of the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Scholars also believe that the abruptness of the opening sentence of the Acts of Paul and Thecla is due to the fact that the document is actually a fragment of a larger piece of work known as the Acts of Paul that was in circulation during the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Christian era. What is interesting about this story is that in spite of the church fathers' strong attacks against the Acts of Paul and Thecla, the document became enormously popular, and it was considered genuine among the early Christians. So instead of disappearing, Thecla's popularity increased in the 4th and 5th century to the point that during these times, Thecla's story is portrayed by many writers and artists. Women and churches are named in her honor, and churches celebrate her saint day, and her shrines become popular pilgrimage destinations. So many of the church fathers mention Thecla or refer to her story in their writings. These fathers include, but are not the only ones, Ambrose of Milan, Gregory of Nazianzus, John Chrysostom, Augustine, Jerome, and Basil, the Bishop of Seleucia, who between the years 432 and 447 wrote a poem dedicated to Thecla, and he called it The Life and the Miracles of Saint Thecla, where he described her sufferings and her victories. So why was this document written? So according to the scholar Edgar J. Goodspeed, the Acts of Paul and Thecla was written for three main reasons. The first one was to defend the Apostle Paul against the accusations of the Ebionites, who were accusing him of having too close relationships with his women converts. Second, he believes it was written to inculcate the practice of virginity and celibacy within the church. And the third reason was to assert the right of women to preach and to baptize. The Acts of Thecla circulated among the Eastern Orthodox churches in Greek, but there are also versions of the document in Syriac, Armenian, Latin, Coptic, and Ethiopic. Some of these versions are quite different from the Greek version, which I find very interesting. Maybe that's one, some of those documents are the ones that are used to tell the story of Thecla and Maalula. Now today, the Acts of Paul and Thecla is considered a narrative that supports the value of women in the ministerial life of the church, although by some scholars it is still perceived with some reservations because in some part of the story, Thecla appears to be more courageous and more dedicated and more committed to the gospel than her teacher Paul. This and the fact that she teaches, she preaches, she baptizes, and she performs healings without the direct authorization of a male authority may have been some of the reasons why the Acts of Paul and Thecla was not chosen to be part of the canon. Modern scholars believe that during the 3rd and 5th centuries, Thecla's story developed as the story of a powerful woman instead of a domesticated one. Her audience during those centuries perceives Thecla as a teacher and a refuter of heretics, as she baptizes not only herself, but many others. And according to Basil of Seleucia, she becomes a holy apostle and a martyr for Christ. Thecla's followers included married and unmarried women and men, and also clergy and laity. And they actually see her as a strong and virtuous religious leader that is able to maintain the gendered virtues of her culture even as she pursues her bold way of life. Although some modern scholars have seen Thecla as a woman who broke the rules of silence and subordination, there are other scholars that actually suggest that the early readers of Thecla's story may have understood her not as a revolutionary, but as a wise woman and a religious leader who worked for the interest of their communities. And this is the end of my story. I ran out of time. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for listening today. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them through our Moodle conversation board. And I hope that you have a wonderful and blessed rest of your day. Thank you very much.